Welcome to Desirable Fruit. I'm Hannah.
I'm Lily.
I'm Luna. And today we're going to be talking about love everyone messaging.
Yeah, we want to talk a little bit about what that looks like and how we as individuals feel about it. I mean, personally, broadly, I feel like love everyone messaging is good. Jesus was real clear about the fact that we should love everyone. I think it can be very empty at times and boring. And what I mean by that is there are a lot of media sources right now within like the LGBTQ LDS sphere that are mostly about people telling stories and then white moms crying about those stories. And that's cool. I'm sure that's very helpful for some people. It's not media for me, and I don't necessarily find it constructive or productive.
And what's your initial reaction, Lily?
I'm kind of in line with that too. Like a lot of the different other resources in like LDS LGBTQ type spaces are very helpful, but it is limiting to some degree, at least currently.
Yeah, it feels to me at least like the main resource that queer people are given in the LDS church is a space to meet with other people and cry about our plight. There's more to my being queer and being alive than crying about that fact. I don't struggle with same-sex attraction and gender dysphoria. I've mostly resolved my gender dysphoria, and I'm real good at same-sex attraction. So,
Same.
I don't know what to do with that, right? If the space is mostly for talking about my life and crying, I don't feel like doing that because I'm bored of telling people my life story and having them cry about it. And I don't feel like my life's a tragedy. I feel like it's very much a success story.
What do you guys think about the contradiction between the love everyone messaging and then it not being practiced? People saying, "Oh, I just love you, but I don't need to accept you."
Yeah, Lily, do you want to take that?
Basic human respect is to respect someone for who they are, whether you care or not. You're not, if someone tells you what their name is, you're not going to say, nope, your name is this. So if someone says, hi, my name is Frank, you're not going to say, no, your name is George. I'm going to call you George because I want to. Mm-hmm. That's kind of generally seen as pretty disrespectful. Something like that can happen a lot for trans people. And it ends up extending beyond just name, but also to pronouns. The most basic respectful thing to do, even if you might not quite understand the situation of someone who's trans, just use that name and pronouns that they tell you to use or ask you to use, because it's just a few words. At the end of the day, you're just sacrificing.
In my experience, people in the church sometimes make a distinction between loving people and caring about their material needs, and that can be very destructive. As a people with a theology, we believe in the construction of Zion, and part of the fundamental definition of Zion is that we take care of people's material needs. That's just what's in the definition, and that's what it says in the book of Moses. So if we're looking to build Zion, we should care about people's material needs. I think we make this very Old Testament distinction where we say, I can love someone and also do something that hurts them, right? People will use the surgery example. I'm causing hurt so that they're okay later. With trans people, that doesn't make any sense to me, because as far as we can tell, gender dysphoria does not go away, right? You can't therapize gender dysphoria out of a person. You can't will it away. It just keeps going, and then you treat it by transitioning most of the time. So an idea oh, I'm telling someone that they shouldn't transition because later on they'll have so much joy. Either I'll be resurrected with a body where it doesn't matter, or I will kill myself. And that's just kind of how that dynamic works, right? It's not I'm going to heal from the pain of you telling me not to transition by all of a sudden being cisgender. That's just not gonna happen. Right? I think of the story of Jephthah. Do you guys know the story of Jephthah?
I do not.
The story of Jephthah is in the book of Judges. He was a military commander in the land of Israel at the time. He was about to go to battle with the Ammonites, and he felt the Spirit of the Lord upon the wind and made a covenant with God that the first thing to exit out of his tent upon his return from battle, he would sacrifice if the Lord gave him victory in battle. So he goes and he gets victory in battle. And then he goes home, and the person coming out of his tent is his daughter. Oh no! What's he gonna do? Is he going to sacrifice his daughter as a burnt offering? And so he sends her off to bewail her virginity in the mountains for 2 months. She comes back and then he sacrifices her. I'm sure he loved his daughter a lot. And also, sacrificing her was not a loving act. And I think that we can make that distinction, right? People can feel love and affection towards us. But if what they're doing is saying, I want you not to transition, I want you to be in a condition that I'm aware will cause you suffering, that's not a loving thing to do.
I guess the tricky thing that does come into some of these cases for a lot of people is a lot of times people don't understand that it is the good thing. And it can be very hard to try and make the case, at least in the beginning of someone's journey, learning and understanding this for themselves so they can be that ally. And so it can go one of two ways. The person either is anxiously engaged in understanding so that they can show unconditional love, or they choose to respond with fear. And that fear is usually what leads to a lot of the other different cases, like what you mentioned earlier with like the different like thought processes that can happen of the you shouldn't transition or it'll be okay afterwards, is the thought of, okay, so the only way for this to be okay now is if I leave life early, because then the problem is solved.
What do you guys think about throwing a stone in Jesus' name? Because like he never commanded us to throw a stone, but so many like people and Christians right now, there's a lot of messaging that like if you are Christian, you don't show love towards this group of people. You only love them as they should be, or as they like ought to be. I know you guys just talked about that.
Yeah, let he that is without sin cast the first stone.
There's a belief that trans people should not transition because it is more worthwhile to live constantly wanting to die while following the will of God than it is to transition and want to be alive and be disobeying the word of God. I don't see transition as an act of disobedience to God's will. I follow the pattern in Moroni 7 that states that if something invites and entices to do good continually, then it's good and of God. And not transitioning to not invite and entice me to do good continually, it invited and enticed me to be depressed and not be able to do anything ever. So that was bad. And then I transitioned and I could do a lot more good because I wasn't incredibly depressed. So I definitely see it as a net good. I don't think that being in a condition that prevents you from doing good in the world and from loving people around you is fundamentally good.
So how do you show love to these people that are in the closet, that are, you know, maybe too scared to come out or kind of in that situation? Like, what would your message be to them?
I mean, well, you talked about that scripture. I tend to bring up what happened for me with personal revelation. I always forget the name of that talk from Holland. I think it's like Wrong Roads or something. I mean, I haven't detransitioned because it was the right path. And it is certainly not easy because I'm trans in the church and policies have been
Less than
rough.
optimal.
Yeah, they've been less than optimal, especially since 2024. But I wouldn't change it.
In 2020, the LDS Church's policy on transgender people was updated. Prior to that point in time, a lot of like membership restrictions and membership responsibilities, access to callings, classes, temple recommends, stuff.
2024, right?
Prior to 2020, a lot of stuff was determined locally, and things like baptism, temple recommend things were determined more at the general scale. Get to 2020, policy becomes a lot more specific, and a lot of things are still kind of up in the air. Policy broadly states that social transition is the point of like, no, we're going to cut off like membership access to people. It's not like excommunicable, but you probably lose a temple recommend, you lose access to different callings. However, hormone replacement therapy, okay, as long as you're using it to treat dysphoria and not to transition, which that doesn't make any sense. The treatment for dysphoria is transition. So, like...
And that's what changed in 2024.
That is what changed in 2024.
Yeah.
Is somehow someone got it in their head that even hormone replacement therapy was also off the table.
Yeah, and it didn't extend to just that. It also extended to adjustments to
participation in classes,
Yeah.
Different callings,
yeah.
the restrictions placed on transgender people for doing something as insignificant as requesting that they be addressed by different pronouns are equivalent to the restrictions placed on members of the church who have committed sex crimes against minors. And I don't think that that's proportionate.
The crazy thing too is even before that change with the callings you lose in 2024, the record annotation still existed. We were still listed on the page with all of those people. Of you get an annotation on your record so the bishop knows whatever about you, but like we didn't lose the callings at the time, they did.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays we also lose those callings, which for a lot of people, including me, that comes across as being further equalized to that of those who have committed sex crimes against children.
Yeah. The policy change in 2024
Yeah.
also has a significantly deeper effect for youth. So, for example, the changing in youth policy also makes it so that youth aren't able to attend single-sex youth events, like overnight activities, and they're not able to stay overnight at mixed-sex overnight activities. So, for example, a teenager who wants to go to FSY right now would have to go home every night after the activities.
Unless
also
there's like
relevant
a
of-
separate room with a
Unless
guardian.
there's a separate room with a guardian, and cases are few because parents of transgender children recognize that that's unreasonable and dumb,
Your kid's
and
not
then
gonna
don't
be
send
this.
their kids to FSY. Right.
Yeah.
But that policy also affects like adults. I have a YSA retreat in September. It's like 2 hours away from the place where I live. And if I wanted to follow that policy and go to the event, then what I would be doing is driving 2 hours to the event, staying the day, waiting until night, driving 2 hours home, and then driving back the next morning every day of a 3-day event. And that's crazy.
I feel like recently in the church, LDS church, that there's been a rise in like love messaging. Like I'll talk about in General Conference, if it ever mentions like LGBTQ people, it says your job's to love them. Even in like Eternal Families Handbook and things like that, it says these issues are complex and the bishop's the one that passes judgment, your job's to love. Yet we see that rise in preaching, but then we see a rise in like kind of opposite policy.
Yeah.
And I kind of want to like, how do you guys feel about this rise in preaching of like love people, love us, love LGBT people, and then this rise of like policy that seems more ignorant?
I think it has like two parts. We have this rise in messaging, which is a good thing, and that probably is going to lead to further shifts down the line. But we also have what's been going on in the world, especially in this country in the past several years, when it comes to laws in states, specific presidential administrations, and as a result, some of these like changes that we saw happen in 2024 are very closely related to a lot of those laws, especially the bathroom policy stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that we either have to use a neutral bathroom, which not every building has, but apparently they're adding those to most buildings globally now, which is like, okay, but then there's also the situation of you either have to use the one you for your assigned gender at birth, so I would have to use the men's room with no one in there and someone watching, or I can go in the women's room for the same exact situation of make sure no one's in there with help from someone assigned female at birth, and then she stands outside, and then I go in alone, which is a lot of effort just to go to the bathroom while at church.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm grateful my church building has a neutral bathroom, because it cuts out the problem, but it is still... It just feels like trans bathroom bills made into church policy to me.
Yeah.
It does not have any of the fruits of the spirit to me.
It's demeaning. It's very much you need a chaperone to go piss, which is dumb, right? Like, especially because the people in my branch are my friends. These are people who I know, and the people who make the policy, who that constructs my experience with my friends, are not part of that. They're not in the community. The people who are making decisions about whether or not I can go to Relief Society with my friends, a church class with my friends. I don't know them. I haven't met them. They're the area 70s. I won't meet them. There's very low probability that I'll ever talk to them. They won't meet me. They won't know what's going on in my branch because they're not there.
Yeah, I actually got more on this specifically with Relief Society. It's not something that just affects trans people. Like, in the ward I was in when this policy change happened, when I already had kind of like not been going to anticipate the possibility because there had been like rumors heard, stake and bishop's side, that there might be a change coming, and so they wanted to be more cautious about whatever situation with me attending and then suddenly having to stop attending. But it was still something noticeable where a lot of people were like, why don't you come in Relief Society with us? I'm like, there's a policy that says I can't. The best I can do is sit outside the room and listen, which is what I did for a while with my bishop's wife at the time, because bishops have switched now. But it was like kind of nice, but at the same time, it sucks to, like, the closest I can get is sitting just outside the room, and that's okay, but I can't go in. And in fact, the response to this by Relief Society president and other women in my ward was, well, why don't we all come out sit with you? And I'm like, well, eventually Relief Society is going to be in the hallway, which means I'll have to be in the Relief Society room because I can't be in Relief Society. I can be adjacent to it.
Yeah.
And they thought that was really annoying and
create,
unfair.
Really socially awkward situations.
Exactly.
Where, like, I've had people who I am, like, helping the missionaries to teach come to church, and then, like, they go over to Relief Society. There's people who I've helped the missionaries to teach who have gotten baptized. And, like, I would like to go to second hour consistently. That would be great. But instead, I look like a slacker every week because, like, I'm just not allowed to.
Exactly.
Right? And, like, in order to not out myself to everyone all at once, like, I just kind of chill with the people who don't go to 7-hour classes because it's a YSA branch. There are people who don't go to 7-hour classes.
That's what I've done before too.
But, like, I would rather go to class, and I'm sure that the missionaries who I am helping to teach the person who they are teaching would also prefer that I go with that person to class, but I'm not allowed to.
What about people that say that you're actually allowed to, because technically the handbook says you need to go to the same as your birth gender
Do you
class?
think I would fit in an elder's quorum?
Yeah, exactly. Like, I had basically, like, never gone to elders quorum until after this change. Like, the closest you can get is, like, I think the first 2 weeks my freshman year at BYU, while I was figuring out talking to my very first bishop and stake president about things, I technically had to, but I basically just sat in the back waiting for the hour to finish because I was like, this is something alien to me. This is not where I would be attending. And then that was it. Had Relief Society for a couple years. Policy suddenly changes. And then I decided that, like, first month in, let's go to Elders Quorum one time with a friend to see what it's like. And because it's BYU, they talked about dating, and it was very slow, very boring, and a bunch of dudes were wondering why the heck I was in there.
At least within my branch, there are some men who I am friends with, but mostly I'm friends with women.
Exactly.
Because socially, living in a red state, in a conservative area, in a relatively conservative church, a lot of the men are pretty conservative, and a lot of the women are not. Because that's just how gendered trends in our generation are. And so I don't get along very well with a lot of the men, and I do get along pretty well with the women. I'm not friends with most of the men. There are more men in my branch who I have, like, yelled at for, like, harassing my friends when they are being uncomfortable.
Oh my gosh.
Than there are men in my branch who I am friends with. And that doesn't, like, look, I've been in meetings with men in my branch where they've been like, we can't have the young women come into the institute activity. What if we try to date them? That's crazy. That's pedophilia. I'm sorry. What are you admitting to right now? I've had situations where like men in my ward are coming up to friends of mine and I have to go up to them and be like, no, she's not laughing because she thinks you're silly. She's laughing because she's very uncomfortable. Leave. Get out now. And like the idea that I'm the problem is crazy to me.
Yeah, and I want to drill down on that, like, because obviously it's like not a good policy, but besides just like preference, because there are people that are female to male transition that will lose the ability to go to elders quorum, right? And they'll love it in elders quorum more. But like, why is this actively harmful to basically force detransition for 1 hour each, like every other week? Why is that a harmful policy, not just something that's like preference?
It's the mix of in most cases, like yours, we're forced into this completely different social circle. It's the case of they're saying, you're supposed to go to this one because that's what you were born as, and you are clearly doing things that are against church policy, and the policy says you have to go here because this is what you technically are, is what it implies very heavily, even though they don't actually say it. Because when they're saying assigned female at birth goes to Relief Society, assigned male at birth goes to elders quorum, they're saying that they are trying to divide men versus women, even though gender doesn't work that way. And the can of worms that is the situation for intersex people in the midst of this is even worse, because in most cases you're somewhere in between if you're intersex. And then like, where do you go? It's whatever the doctor said when you were born, but then how on earth does that work? Because the doctor could make a mistake. It happens in a lot of cases. So it's not like every doctor that delivers a baby is suddenly overcome with the spirit and perfectly declares what their gender is, this big, important, eternal thing, which is like who they are intrinsically, and that it is for sure always going to align with their biological sex, because then intersex people means it's not just men and women.
Yeah. And
in that argument too.
I think it's important to note that people don't treat me like a man. Period. End of sentence. If I show up to elders quorum, they're going to be confused. Part of the justification I've heard for the separation of like trans women into elders quorum and trans men into Relief Society is that it keeps people from being confused about the nature of gender and the church's teachings on the subject. I think people would be more confused about the nature of gender and the church's teachings on the subject if I showed up to elders quorum.
Exactly. And like, because of the way it's set up, it more often than not, you're not having people attend the correct one according to the policy. You have people just not going at all or leaving early, which has primarily been my situation. After a while, it just made more sense to that day I have only an hour of church, because it just kind of feels like a pity party to be sitting out in the hallway, which that was my idea originally, but after a while it was like, this kind of just doesn't feel great, because it's a case of people I know in my ward, other women, are going in to Relief Society, and if they hadn't paid attention before, they suddenly are like, oh, why don't you come in? I can save you a seat. I'm like, I am not allowed by church policy. Or there's even cases where people won't have ever met me, and they will have been in the ward for several months because I have never done any of the Relief Society stuff because I've had to stop. And I had a moment like that where I was talking to one friend, and this one girl joined in, and we were talking a bunch, and then she's like, I don't think I've seen you around before. And I'm like, yeah, I can't go to Relief Society, sorry.
And that's part of it, right? It's like, first off, it's written in like misgendering, right? Because that's part of it. And then it's also like forced outing.
Yeah,
for people.
and
And
that's
that
contradictory to loving one another,
and that
in
can
my
be
opinion.
very unsafe for people's life. I have friends that have gotten really terrible experiences from it, things like that.
I mean, like, with the coming schedule change, where we have Sunday school and then Elders Quorum Relief Society, my branch has Sunday school and Relief Society in the same room. And so logistically, what that's probably going to look like come September is at the end of the half hour, all of the men plus me will stand up and leave. Like, that doesn't make any sense, right? Like, I can understand like that a transphobic logic behind it, and also just visually it's incoherent.
Let's move on from policy to culture.
Okay.
So we talked about kind of how the policy is incongruent with the messages of love everyone. Where would you say like the culture is currently at in people that are actively going to church every week?
I actually think that's where like the start of the changing of messaging can actually connect in the positive ways. The culture, depending on where you are and who you're around and the age groups, is whether it is more negative if you're trans and more positive if you're trans, or if it's neutral. And a lot of that is because people are going off of whatever they grew up with or whatever old messaging was. So that change in messaging can slowly start changing the culture, which if you try and see it a certain way, you can think, okay, so they're trying to maybe shift the culture over time so that it's easy to change the policy because then you have the least people leaving, but that really isn't how it should work. I guess it's more of a side tangent, though. I guess, at least in all the wards I've had at BYU, which is an unusual case, I have never really had an actual issue, but at the same time, I fall in that category of passability, which is where unless I tell someone in any way, shape, or form, I am assumed to be a cis woman, which is someone assigned female at birth. And so it becomes quickly confusing if I'm not going to those classes. So then there becomes this air in a ward of like, oh, what's going on there? Or people generally are neutral or don't even talk about it, so I don't see it much. But for some people, it's a roulette system of you could have people your age that are absolutely chill or complete allies, or you could run into people that have the same views as someone over the age of 60 that their extent of interactions with queer people is Fox News.
Yeah. The most recent Pew Research survey demonstrates that about 30% of current members of the LDS Church think that increased acceptance of transgender people in society is a positive change. That's 1 in 3. It's not great. It's relatively bad.
It's better than what I thought it was, actually.
It's better than zip. Yeah.
Yeah.
By and large, passability is very helpful. I think that's all I'll say. As long as people don't know that you're trans, flying under the radar is perfectly fine.
Until classes.
Yeah. Until classes, until someone looks at your, like, member tools profile.
Yeah.
Like,
They don't let you change your legal sex registered with them, but they will let you change your name and your picture. So it's kind of funny.
I got mine changed.
Oh, you got the gender
Somehow.
marker?
Yeah.
How?
Don't I found it on the website and I changed it and just changed. And the bishop messaged me and was like, "Hey, you want this changed?" I was like, "Sure."
Oh my gosh! Wait, can we go to your ward for like a month to get that done?
I don't. I'm early transition.
Can I just like transfer my record?
Yeah.
Back?
We'll talk about this after.
Yeah, we'll talk about it after. But yeah,
we'll double check.
But yeah, like for example, my member tools has preferred name Lily, full name Lillian James McKenzie, and has a picture of me from like a year ago, which looks pretty close to what I look today, except longer hair because I changed my hairstyle. And then you read through all of that, and then you get to the one that says male.
Yeah.
Which is like, what?
I will say, like, having my priesthood lineage on, like,
okay, yeah, that is actually cool, though.
Is kind of
yeah. For it to say I'm a priestess, essentially, is still really cool.
But yeah, it's.
Yeah. I do want to just briefly acknowledge her because I've been really lucky with my words. I don't pass. I don't know if I will ever. But I have a lot of friends that when they came out as trans, they were like disbarred from coming to church anymore by the bishop.
Yeah, like.
And so it's a real pain that people go through. But it sounds like all of us kind of haven't experienced too much of it.
Yeah, it's such a weird anomaly to me because I expected so much negativity coming to BYU, and then when I didn't find that, and others I knew were facing that, it's always had me in this spot of awareness of it, which is why I don't look at it through rose-colored glasses. Like, I know I have had this positive experience, but I also know very well how horrible it can be even today. I mean, like, one friend of mine years ago, she ended up having a situation with her ecclesiastical endorsement pulled by her bishop because she had not been attending regularly due to mental health and being sick. But the extra details you can find out is he often talked bad about her behind her back whenever he was in elders quorum, and a non-binary friend of hers who was assigned male at birth in that elders quorum heard about it a bunch. So it was a situation of, because of a bias from the bishop, it was easier for her to run into hardships for getting her degree while at BYU just because she was trans and just because she had this bishop. I could never imagine that happening with any of the bishops I've had. I can't even like comprehend someone who gets called a bishop being that sleazy, that diabolical, because you have such an important role. It is not something you shouldn't run off of emotion like that. If you don't understand a thing, it's something you immediately learn with.
There's a couple things that have been very helpful to me. One is the fact that during all of my transition, I've been a university student. And so I go from place to place all the time. And people all of a sudden are meeting me for the first time. And that is very helpful, because when you transition, a lot of people who you know have their memory of you contextualizes how they treat you now.
Yeah.
People who are just meeting me for the first time are more likely to gender me correctly and categorize me with women. Exactly. And that's just how my experience has been. Additionally, like I mentioned last time, we're all white. People who experience more intersectional or multiple marginalization have generally a harder time with it. Yes. If people are immigrants, if people are people of color, there's going to be a more difficult time, especially at church schools, right? So, for example, I had a friend who transitioned while at BYU, Idaho, and was an immigrant. Oh. And if you are if on a student visa, you can't get a job outside of the university. And you have to be keeping with the honor code in order to have a job. And she had to
they were tighter about it there.
Mm-hmm. And so she had to keep her hair relatively short just so that she could stay employed. And I had to face employment harassment at her place of employment because she couldn't get a job elsewhere. And that is a sucky situation. At the same time, like, different places treat people differently, right? I have one friend who's out in like North Carolina who's been meeting with missionaries for the last 2 years and still can't get baptized because she's trans. On the other hand, I know another person who's out in the Philippines, got baptized 2 years ago, and the mission president didn't care. So a lot of it is just very arbitrary and has to do with where you live and what the situation's like.
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, it's the situation between BYU, Idaho, and Provo is so wild to me. Because sometimes I'm moments like that is where I realize, okay, so that's why there are some people in the church that say BYU Provo is overrun with liberals and leftists, because that is not how it is at like BYU Provo these days.
Yeah.
But like that's just a small difference. It's just that you're not because of the ambiguity with the dress code at BYU Provo and the way they enforce it, trans people can transition and present differently in a binary sense at the very least.
Right. I won't pretend that I'm not very left-wing in my politics. I will say,
yes,
according to the data that we have, BYU is one of the most politically balanced universities in the country on the standard of professorship political affiliation.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I want to finish up with 2 last questions. And so the main questions, we talked a lot about how people fall short of living to that messaging that Christ like love, both in like queer circles a little bit and also in the church circle, like policy and everything. But what are times where it hasn't like felt, where we felt maybe genuinely loved or seen, or what would that look like?
That would look like my freshman year at BYU. This was, before those policy changes. This is the first ward where I was like completely out, because the YSA I was in before moving, too many people I knew growing up, so I didn't really want to risk it. That's the first time I got to attend Relief Society, since the summer before I wasn't. And despite the fact that I had yet to start hormones, had hair slightly shorter than this at the time, even if I was clean shaven, you could see a bit of stubble and whatever, and my voice was not trained. I was included in Relief Society, and I still have like the most heartwarming group photo from the first Friendsgiving I ever got to do, and to be included in that and to be treated as any of the other women there was like just such an amazing moment. And the stake president and bishop that I had that made that possible. I know the bishop's out of his calling and the stake president's calling ends soon, but I know that both of them made big impacts on more than just me over time because of other people that were in that stake around the same time or more recently. And even after the policy changes, they did the best that they could. And just for there to be all those ways for people to mistreat me because I didn't pass at the time, and to still be treated like one of the other women in the ward was so special. And that was before they changed things and before I can fly under the radar now. And now they want me in elders quorum. So it kind of also feels like a backhanded slap by the church in the way that I was able to experience this because of the amazing people and community I found myself in, and the circumstance of the policies, and then for those policies to change, and for even the best people to not be able to fully help me feel welcome because they are limited by a bunch of writing in a book by some people that are like middle management of the church headquarters or something. I don't know who exactly writes policy, but
I will say, I feel like the general leadership of the LDS Church is very focused on telling people how to exclude LGBT people and especially trans people, and has done very little to instruct people on how to include and create spaces of belonging for LGBTQ people. The rhetoric is a consistent love people, and there's no specifics going into that, and the policy is a consistent you can't go there.
Exactly.
I think generally on the individual level, in terms of helping trans people in congregations, making spaces outside of the church environment for people to be people, fantastic. Invite people to dinner, invite people to game nights, do like social things outside of church, and invite trans people who are part of your congregation. Beyond that, at like the larger macro scale, I know Affirmation LDS is already working on this project, but we need larger like funding pools for people to have affirming therapy. We need larger funding pools for people to be able to find housing. If there is a member of your congregation who is struggling to find a job, help them find a job. Like, there are material needs that trans people have that are exacerbated by the social ostracization that we find in being trans. And religious organizations can help people to find the social networks they need to access the material like goods that they need to have to live.
Yes.
Because like trans people are like, is it 3 to 6 times more likely to be homeless and unemployed?
Yeah. And that's
and to receive violence, like.
And that's particularly true for trans women of color.
Yeah.
And I think
it's
that's
6 times
necessary
more likely at the top end.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The more intersectionality, the worse it is for you because of human history.
My other question is, how do we fall short as trans people in loving people? Like, it's hard to say what's our blind spot? Like, how, it's blind, how do we see it? But how can we as trans people love people more?
I think personally, I've experienced that because there is such a common experience of social ostracization and being trans, we get very paranoid. And so we can be very reactive and responsive to people who are just being microaggressive, right? If people are misgendering us unintentionally or things like that. There are moments of patience and there's moments of separation. And it's important for us to effectively gauge what type of environments are safe for us to be in and which are not, and which are genuinely unsafe and which feel unsafe but are safe.
Setting boundaries for ourselves and with others and holding grace for ourselves and others is that key.
Absolutely. And I think that that's something that people need to personally introspect on and, if possible, talk about with a therapist. Mm-hmm. I think that like gauging how our bodies are responding to things is very important. There are people who have panic attacks walking into LDS chapels. those people should not attend sacrament meeting because that's not going to be a sacred space for them.
Yeah, they won't be safe, happy, healthy, so they will be unable to properly feel the Spirit.
Right. The spirit of the promise will be absent for them because that's just not the mindset that they can get into.
Exactly.
Right? I think as trans people, we can definitely like make more space for people to learn, and we can provide people with resources that they can use to learn so that that burden isn't entirely on ourselves. One thing trans people can do is direct people to our podcast. Like, follow, and subscribe.
Thank you so much for watching. Let's all love everyone.
Yeah.
Just felt like such a good intro. Someone want to give a disclaimer and we'll put it at the beginning.
Sure.
Yeah, you
I
have
think
something
I
down
know that.
probably.
Nothing that any of the three of us say is a representation of the LDS Church or any other organization, religious or secular.